There is a label on a gift basket in the background of a major interview that nobody was supposed to notice. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because what it says on that label is not supposed to be there at all. Not on a gift basket, not in a produced interview, not on anything connected to the Sussex operation in 2024. Her Royal Highness, Duchess of Sussex. That title was surrendered. And I want to be precise about what surrendered means in this context because it matters enormously. Not informally laid aside, not quietly stopped being used while remaining technically available, not set aside pending a review of the arrangement. It was surrendered as a formal, negotiated, documented term at the Sandringham Summit of 2020, when Harry sat across from Queen Elizabeth II.
Fury that Meghan Markle continues to use her royal title.
A woman who had spent her entire adult life in service to an institution she loved and believed in, and agreed to the specific conditions of the Sussex exit from royal duties. Those conditions were written down. They were accepted by both parties. And one of them, clearly and deliberately, was that the HRH designation would no longer be used going forward. Queen Elizabeth II is now dead. She cannot say anything about what she agreed to in that room. Harry cannot be publicly held accountable by the person he made the agreement with.
He is frightened. I mean, he can be very angry with her, but then there are times when she really lets go.
And the label is back. The Kern Lima interview was not a live, uncontrolled environment where something could accidentally wander into the background. It was produced content, shot deliberately, framed deliberately, with choices made at every single stage about what appeared in the shot and what did not, because that is how produced content works.
I believe that that's her voice on the grounds that every photograph we've seen of the alleged
Kern Lima is not an acquaintance. She is one of Meghan's closest friends and a woman who built a cosmetics company and sold it for $1 billion, meaning she has spent her entire professional life understanding exactly how branding and image work and what everything in a frame communicates. The idea that a label reading HRH Duchess of Sussex simply drifted into the background of a major interview without anyone noticing, without Jamie noticing, without the production team noticing, without Meghan noticing, requires a level of collective inattention that does not match anything else I know about how this operation runs. Which leaves the other explanation, and it is the one I find considerably more plausible given everything else I know about how carefully this operation is run. It was placed deliberately, not announced, not publicly defended, just quietly visible to anyone paying close enough attention, a way of reclaiming something without ever having to stand behind a microphone and explain why.
that has political influence and influences voters. So with that said, we've heard about
A signal rather than a statement, present and deniable in the same breath, the way the best signals always are when the people sending them understand what they are doing. Senior palace sources are reportedly furious, and the fury runs deeper than protocol, though the protocol breach alone is significant. This is fury at what the act represents, which is breaking a promise made personally to Queen Elizabeth II at the end of her life, in a room built on the specific foundation of trust between a grandmother and a grandson who she was trying to protect. That is a different category of breach from any of the other Sussex controversies because it involves a personal commitment made directly to a specific person who can no longer respond to it being broken. And I think that deserves to be named as such, rather than folded into a general complaint about Sussex protocol.
with some little hand that seems so small, it didn't seem like it belonged to a 3-year-old.
Now connect that to what Meghan actually said in the same interview, because this is where the performance and the reality start to pull apart in a way that is visible to anyone watching carefully enough. She delivered a line that was clearly constructed to land as a moment of hard-won peace, the kind of thing that gets clipped from a longer interview and turned into a motivational graphic by people who found it powerful and resonant. "The prove it game," she said, "is over. I know who I am. I know what I am. I'm a good wife. I'm a good friend." The room responded. The audience responded. The moment did exactly what it was designed to do, except for one small detail that is easy to miss in real time and impossible to ignore once you notice it.
You prove that you're a good wife or a good friend, and I was like, I am just so done with the prove it game.
Watch her head while she is saying those things. While she is listing the qualities that define her, the relationships that anchor her identity, the roles she is claiming as genuinely and solidly hers, she is almost imperceptibly shaking it side to side. The tiny, involuntary no that the body produces when the mind and the mouth are not in full agreement. When what is being said and what is being felt are pulling in slightly different directions. It is subtle enough that in real time, in a room responding warmly to her words, most people would not catch it at all. But once you see it, the performance and the reality start to look like two separate things sharing the same frame. Set the body language aside for a second though, because the words themselves contain something even more revealing when you look at them carefully. She said, "good wife." She said, "good friend." And she never said, "good daughter." In a speech built entirely around knowing exactly who she is and shutting down every critic and every lingering question about her character.
Ripped off her new podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder, from this woman.
In a moment specifically designed to present herself as a woman who has made peace with herself and with the people around her, her father and her family of origin did not make the list. They did not even receive a passing mention. That omission is not accidental. Omissions in carefully prepared moments, delivered to cameras, received by audiences, never are. And it sits directly next to the observable fact that Thomas Markle is 79 years old, has had 2 heart attacks and a stroke, is aging and unwell in a way that the years ahead will only make more visible, and has not received a phone call from his daughter.
The attitude that she doesn't want me to see them, that's the way it's going to be. I won't.
Not a note, not a gesture of any kind from a woman who described herself to millions of people as a good friend. Not a note. Not any contact at all. While Meghan describes herself in a produced interview that reached millions of people as a good friend, and the list ends there, without any mention of the people who cannot do anything for that self-description. Samantha Markle, who has been watching this pattern for long enough that she no longer describes it with particular surprise. She says it the way you say things that have simply become facts you have made peace with. Makes a point about Meghan that is genuinely hard to argue with from the outside. She knows how to make people feel seen and valued when there is something in it for her.
For years now, folks, we've been fed this shiny, polished-up fairy tale about how my half-sister...
She sends the gift baskets. She writes the notes. She performs closeness and care for every camera and every relationship that has something to offer the operation she is building. The people who are only family, who carry nothing useful for the brand, who have nothing commercial to contribute and nothing that can be leveraged for coverage or alignment. Those people get nothing in return. Not even contact. That is Samantha's reading of her sister, stated without visible bitterness, just observation, and placed next to the gift basket with the title on the label appearing in a produced interview, placed next to the Kern Lima friendship that arrived precisely when the podcast needed rescuing, placed next to the Mulroney exit that happened precisely when the association became a liability. The picture it forms is fairly consistent.
Guys, enjoy this one. All right, well, as Meghan Bound coverage begins, forget Megxit. Meghan Bound is now all we'll be talking.
The like button on this video keeps Palace Insider doing this kind of analysis, and if you have found this useful, it genuinely costs you nothing to hit it before we go further. Now, I want to come back to Harry for a moment, because I think the Harry dimension of this is the part that gets lost in the coverage of these stories, and that I find genuinely worth sitting with, because it raises questions about the inside of that relationship that the outside is not well positioned to answer. Harry built his entire post-royal public identity around a set of principles, and the most visible, the most personal, and arguably the most emotionally credible of them was the protection of his children from the kind of media exposure that he believes damaged him throughout his own childhood, and that he believes ultimately contributed to his mother losing her life.
Elizabeth II tried so hard why it was never strong enough. They should be stripped of their titles, shouldn't they?
He has said this in many different ways, in many different contexts, and with what sounds, to me at least, like genuine feeling rather than a managed talking point. The pain underneath that principle seems real. The origin of it in his own experience seems real. And now, Angela Levin is watching the gap between that stated principle and what is actually happening, and what she is watching is the principle being quietly overridden. Not confronted, not argued about, not publicly reversed with Harry's agreement, just gradually, incrementally, and without apparent confrontation, moved aside in favor of what the brand needed in the moment the podcast numbers dropped.
This senior royal family sources are disgusted about this. What is she playing at?
A little more voice, a little more face, a little more access to the children that Harry said he was protecting. The question that raises is genuinely one I am not in a position to answer from the outside, and I want to be honest about those limits. What is actually happening inside that household between two people, where one of them has a public principle that he has stated repeatedly and with apparent conviction, and the other is acting in ways that directly contradict that principle, and there is no visible disagreement between them about any of it? The options are limited. Either Harry has genuinely changed his position on the principle and is maintaining the public version of it for appearance, rather than because he still holds it in practice. Or he genuinely does not know how to push back in a way that does not create a conflict that becomes its own story. Or the dynamic between those two people is something other than what the public presentations of it suggest. I do not know which of those is true, but I think the gap between the principle and the practice is real and visible and worth naming. What I do know is that the pattern across this week's news, the title on the label, the podcast timing, the kitchen video, the interview body language, the Thomas Markle silence, the friendship history, is not a collection of unrelated stories that happen to land in the same week. There is a thread running through all of it, and the thread is this: what is being performed and what is actually true are not the same thing, and the gap between them keeps becoming visible in moments that nobody designed to be revealing. Stay with me, because the interview connects to something else that has been happening on the number side, and the timing here is not subtle enough to dismiss as coincidence, even if you want to be generous about it. Confessions of a Female Founder, Meghan's podcast, was the project she had staked a significant piece of her post-royal professional identity on, a venture into audio content that was supposed to demonstrate her independent value as a creator and a voice, separate from the royal drama and the Netflix deal and all the other commercial arrangements that required the Sussex Association to justify their existence. And it quietly fell out of the top 100 in the charts, with no announcement, no explanation offered, just a steady downward movement that the numbers made impossible to frame as anything other than underperformance in a format and a space that was supposed to be exactly where she was building something. And within a short time of that happening, close enough for the pattern to be visible, Lilibet appeared in the Kern Lima interview. A voice, the kitchen, the strawberry jam being stirred, the deliberately intimate, carefully domestic moment, warm and human, and exactly the kind of content that changes the conversation around a brand that has been generating less flattering coverage for the better part of several months. Angela Levin, who has spent years studying this family at close range, is direct about what she thinks this pattern represents. Meghan is using the children to encourage people to engage with her products. Sweet children create an emotional response in the people watching them that lowers defenses, softens perceptions, and wraps a struggling brand in something genuinely warm. And the thing about that particular tool is that it works. That is the uncomfortable truth that sits underneath this observation. It works because it is designed to work, because a glimpse of domestic family life in a sunny kitchen does exactly what it is supposed to do to the people watching it, which is make them feel something real and human toward whoever is standing next to those children. But there is a detail from that kitchen scene that every parent watching it felt before they even consciously processed what they were feeling, because it is the kind of thing that bypasses analysis entirely and goes straight to instinct. Lilibet's hair was completely loose, hanging free, near an actively boiling pot on the stove. It is the specific cold discomfort of seeing a child near a hazard that one wrong movement could turn into something catastrophic, and it is the kind of thing that makes you ask whether anyone in that moment was actually thinking about the child, or whether the shot was simply more important than the safety consideration that every parent in the room should have caught immediately. This is the point where Harry's stated position becomes genuinely uncomfortable to look at squarely, because Harry has given versions of a speech about children and media exposure repeatedly, and with what seems like real feeling behind it. He talks about the damage that sustained public exposure does to a developing mind, about his own childhood, and the cameras that followed him everywhere and made normal development essentially impossible. He talks about Diana, about what the press did to her, and how it started with small intrusions that nobody stopped, that everybody accommodated, until they accumulated into something that couldn't be controlled anymore. He has said, in terms that leave no room for ambiguity, that keeping his children away from the public gaze is the one meaningful form of protection he can give them that his own parents couldn't give him, and that this matters to him more than almost anything else about the life he has built. Angela Levin's observation on how that stated principle is interacting with reality is precise and lands hard. Harry has made his position completely clear, and Meghan keeps showing more of the children regardless. Not in a way that triggers a public confrontation, not in a way Harry can push back against without becoming a different and worse story, just incrementally. A little more face, a little more voice, a little more access with each production, until the protection he built his entire post-royal identity around is being quietly dismantled piece by piece in service of a brand that needed rescuing from a podcast falling off the charts. Think about what that dynamic actually means when you sit with it. One partner has spoken publicly, repeatedly, and with genuine conviction about a principle he holds close to his core identity, and the other partner is simply acting as though it was never said, not arguing with it, not publicly disagreeing, just continuing in a different direction as though the principle does not apply to the specific decision being made right now. That is not a small observation about a small thing. Now let me talk about the friendships, because "I'm a good friend" is a claim that deserves to be placed directly next to the actual record, and the record is more specific than the general claim allows for. Jessica Mulroney was one of Meghan's most publicly visible close friends during the royal years. Present at events, treated as genuinely inner circle, clearly valued in a way that was publicly visible and mutually acknowledged. And then during the summer of 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement was generating a specific kind of conversation that put certain alliances under scrutiny, the moment the Mulroney association became complicated rather than useful, she was gone from that circle. Not in a messy public falling out that generated tabloid coverage for months and gave both people a chance to tell their version. Not in a long, difficult process of two people trying to navigate a genuinely changed situation. Just cleanly removed. No longer visible, no longer present. No longer apparently part of whatever the inner circle had become by the following season. The moment the association stopped being an asset, the association ended. That is the sequence, and it is specific enough to be worth naming. That is the record, and it is specific enough to be worth noting. Nakia Preddy, another name that surfaces in discussions about Meghan's closer relationships. Gone quiet in the same way. Not dramatically, just no longer visible in the way people who are genuinely important to someone's life tend to remain visible over time. And then there is Gwyneth Paltrow, because the Gwyneth dynamic deserves its own moment, because it is perhaps the clearest illustration of how the relationships in Meghan's orbit seem to function when tested. Paltrow gave an interview in which she said things about Meghan that were technically polite enough to defend individually, each sentence capable of being quoted without apparent criticism. But that landed in context as pointed and deliberate, the specific kind of criticism delivered by someone who understands exactly how to make something land without being explicitly sayable. What happened next was a staged Instagram reconciliation that arrived so quickly after the Vanity Fair piece that the gap between criticism and restored public warmth barely existed. And shortly afterward, Meghan appeared publicly without makeup, natural and stripped back and unfiltered, in an aesthetic that mirrors almost exactly what Gwyneth Paltrow has spent years building as her own signature approach to public image. I am not going to tell you that is accidental, because I do not think it was. That is not what genuine reconciliation between two real friends looks like. Genuine reconciliation is slower and messier and less aesthetically coherent than what happened here. And it is not what adopting someone else's established visual aesthetic by coincidence looks like either. Compare it to Martha Stewart, who was drawn into the same uncomfortable news cycle when a pasta recipe story put her and Meghan in adjacent headlines, and who handled it the way Martha Stewart handles everything. Steady, consistent, completely unbothered. Not performing warmth she did not feel, not staging a reunion for the cameras, not appearing makeup-free to mirror someone else's established brand positioning. Just grounded and genuine and entirely uninterested in managing anyone else's perception of her. That contrast is instructive because what Martha Stewart demonstrated in that moment is the thing that every clip, every produced interview, every carefully placed gift basket with a title on the label, every borrowed aesthetic, and every staged reconciliation is chasing and never quite landing. Authenticity cannot be produced or staged, and the more visible and sustained the effort to manufacture it, the more clearly the manufacturing shows through to anyone who has been paying attention long enough to see the pattern. "The prove it game is over," Meghan said. "But the game is only over when you stop playing it." And nothing in that interview, not the words, not the body language, not the friendships on display, not the absence of the family who never made the list of things she is, not the title in the background, suggested that anyone in that room was anywhere close to ready to stop. Here is what I keep returning to. The thread that connects all of this. Thomas Markle is 79 years old. He has had 2 heart attacks and a stroke. He is aging and unwell, and his daughter has not contacted him. Not a phone call, not a note, not a gesture of any kind toward a man who has never stopped being her father regardless of everything that has been said publicly about him. Samantha Markle says this without bitterness. She says it the way someone says something they have had to absorb and make peace with. The way you talk about a pattern that stopped surprising you a long time ago. The warmth is real for the people who can do something for the brand. The people who can generate coverage and align their audience and add something to the image. The people who cannot do anything for that operation, who have nothing left to offer the commercial story, who are only family rather than assets, they get nothing. The gift basket with the title on the label made it onto camera in a major produced interview. Thomas Markle has not made it onto anything. These are not separate stories that happen to share the same week. They are the same story told through different details. And the thing running through all of them is the question of whether the performance and the reality are pointing anywhere near the same direction. The prove it game, she said, is over. The questions, as far as I can see, are just getting started. What do you make of all of this? Does the title on that label read to you as deliberate or accidental? Do you think anyone around Harry is actually pushing back on the children being used to manage the brand narrative? And do you find the body language reading of the prove it game moment compelling, or are you reading it differently? Drop all of it in the comments. I read every one of them and they genuinely shape what we cover next. So your take on this matters. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one.